Hello, welcome back to CPLC Empoderate. I'm Fatima Alshamari, your co-host here. And today we have a surprise co-host. Maria Jesus wasn't able to make it to this podcast recording. So we have Veronica. You might remember her from our past seasons. Veronica, how are you feeling?
I'm very excited to be here co-hosting with you, Fatima. You've seen me before a few times. I'm usually behind the cameras, but very excited to be here with the special guest we have today.
Yes, today we have Amanda Cosme Reddie. Amanda, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great.
That's awesome. So Amanda Cosme Reddie is the founder of Take Brand Consulting and EVP of Operations at Alpha Inc., Association of Latino Professionals for America. So tell us about yourself. How was it growing up? Tell us about your roots and family. What experiences have shaped you into the renowned servant leader you are today?
Yeah, thank you. So originally my grandparents are actually from Puerto Rico, and my parents are from Chicago and New York. So I'm a third gen Latina when it comes to that family background and where we come from. And I grew up in Chicago as well myself until I was about 11 and moved from Chicago to Cave Creek, Arizona. And if you are familiar with Cave Creek, Arizona, it is huge culture shock for me going from where I was. And because of that, it was just a different community, different lifestyle, different demographics. And so it was an adjustment for me, for sure. But that's a little bit about where I grew up and, the move that I made.
Wow, your parents from New York and Chicago, two really busy cities, and
Yes.
then you come here to Cave
Yes.
Creek. Why did you move? Why did you decide to move to Arizona?
Yes. So my mother wanted to provide a better life for me. I was an only child at the time. And, there were times in Chicago that we were living out of a car. So it wasn't, the most wealthy situation, and it was dangerous at times. And there's just I think like any family too, you have drama that happens in your family. And, my mom wanted to get away from that too. So she really looked at it as let's start a better life. Let's get you out of Chicago. We'll go to Arizona. The real estate is better. My stepdad at the time had started an appraisal business. So it just made sense for them financially. It made sense in terms of starting over. What did kind of inadvertently happen, though, is I lost my culture when I moved to Cave Creek, Arizona, because I had to adapt, right? Different demographics, different lifestyles, as I mentioned earlier. And so, going through that process, it was I needed to make friends. I needed to kind of start fresh myself. And that was really difficult for me as a child, navigating through that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so growing up here in Cave Creek, because you were 11 when you came to Cave Creek?
Yep.
So at school, how did you see the culture there at all? Is that what kind of gave you oh, wow, this is different?
Yes, it was. So it was predominantly white population. The kids there had money, so they were well dressed. They had everything they needed, and we were at the time really kind of just getting our foot on the ground in Arizona. And so I had things to start, clothes and all that, but it wasn't the same as these kids. So it was an adjustment in terms of trying to fit in with people, and also the style in Arizona, in Chicago versus Arizona is a lot different too. So, I really just had to adjust to everything, the way they spoke, the way they dressed, how they acted. And, at the time I didn't realize oh, this is not good for me. I don't want to be molded into, somebody else. But as a kid, when you're trying to fit in, you're just anything I can do to make friends, right?
When was that pivotal moment for you? When you decided oh, I want to embrace being myself?
Yeah. It was pretty quickly after, because I instantly did not really have a great, I didn't have a great time trying to make friends. Honestly, it was really difficult for me. I was bullied a lot. And so that urge to kind of fit in happened really quickly. And, you know, it was everything, even from my name, like Amanda, right? But going there, the kids would say, oh, she's a man, duh. Like, it's so stupid, right? Like, now I think back, I'm like, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
But,
like, just give me creatively
Being
mean.
kids, right?
but as a kid, you're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, no, like, I don't want to be
Yeah.
like, you know, made fun of for my name, something as simple as that. And then, of course, my last name is Cosme, and everyone would mispronounce it all the time. And it was difficult.
How did bullying, would you be able to share how you feel, how bullying affected you and like how you overcame it?
So I think I never really overcame it. I think I went through it, right? I went through it. I did my best to, again, kind of change my appearance, the way I spoke and different things like that to fit in. But I think as I got older, and I did eventually start to get more friends. They weren't the most popular people, but at that time I'm like, I don't care. Like anybody, you know, who I can build a relationship with is great. And so I think just over time, I was able to embrace it in a way, in my own way. And that actually started off really more so into my early adulthood. For my childhood, I basically just eventually adapted, made those friends. But I also think I held this like resentment of school by that time. Because like once I graduated high school, I'm like, I don't even want to be around like other students. I want to go and do my own things. My parents were, you know, entrepreneurs. And so I was driven by, you know, by the time I got out of high school, they were well off in terms of finances. And
So you saw your parents become entrepreneurs and you're like, oh, I want to follow in their footsteps.
Yes, it was like the rags to riches, you know, concept basically. We didn't have anything, and then all of a sudden we started taking vacations and you know, now that I think about it, those were kind of the ways I did try to fit in with kids. I would be like, oh, do you want to come on this vacation with my family? Or like, now we have money, I can have a big birthday party. Like those things I didn't have, right? But they also didn't really mean anything in Chicago because a lot of the kids were in my situation. And so by the time I got out of high school, I was like, I want to make money. I saw money as a way of being successful. And I learned later on that is the complete opposite. Because
when did you learn that? When was that aha moment for you? Like, I need to embrace my culture. I need to know that there's other things that are more important than just money.
So it happened when I did go to college eventually. So what my plan was I was like, I'm going to take a gap year. I'm going to just take some space. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to go move out on my own, which is also very different from like most, you know, Puerto Rican cultures. They want to like stay with their family and like be there. But because of me kind of being taken away from that and seeing my parents be so ambitious as entrepreneurs, I was very much like craving that independence. So I wanted to move out on my own. I wanted to start making the money. And so I did. And throughout my early career, I struggled a lot in terms of kind of having that same mindset. I was like going into workplaces like, oh, I want to fit in and I want to be the best. And, you know, that was the mindset for me. I knew I wanted to start a business eventually, like my parents, but I wasn't ready at that time. I was very immature. I was very very money driven. And so eventually I saw myself kind of have this pattern where I really wasn't getting promoted and developed the way that I should have been throughout working at different organizations. And so I was like, you know what, it's time. Let me go back to school. I'm going to go to college. I went to Grand Canyon University in 2017. Yes, go Lopes.
I'm an ally. I'm ASU, but so go Sun Devils, but we support Lopes too.
One thing I really loved about them is their flexibility and their schedule and how they build your classes around your life, because I also had my first daughter at that time. My daughter was 2 when I was starting in college. And so that was hard for me to like transition, but it was almost like she helped motivate me too. Like I became
part of your why.
Exactly. I was like, I want to work for companies, but I want to actually progress in the companies that I'm working at. And I want to show my daughter that, she can do that. She can be this ambitious person. And so when I went to Grand Canyon University, that's when things took a turn for me. That's when I stopped focusing on money and I started focusing on the internal things that were just growing, right, all the way from my early childhood.
Do you mean like healing, like self-healing?
Yes, yep, healing, self-discovery process, that all started to happen. I started studying, and because I was already working in kind of like leadership roles by this time. I started very much like sales associate, working in sales, and I grew to like sales lead, a manager. So I was in the transition from like early to mid-career. And I learned about servant leadership at Grand Canyon University. And that was like an aha moment for me. Okay. I was like, this is who I am. I am a servant leader. Like, every quality about a servant leader is what I bring to the table. I love to give to people. I love to serve people. And that really helped me too, because I'd have people ask me at times, oh, what's your leadership style? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like Googling what leadership styles are there. What am I? And so that was huge for me. And when you really embrace servant leadership, it is not really the monetary value that's important to you.
How do you describe servant leadership?
So I describe servant leadership as putting others before yourself. Obviously, we have our mental health. We have to take care of ourselves. That is first and foremost. You can't serve others until you are in the right mindset and space to do that. But in any case where, for example, like let's just say that there's an opportunity in front of me. I could take that opportunity, or I could bring in maybe a friend of mine who doesn't have the same access to that opportunity. Right. And I could say, you know what, I would love to see you do this. And, another opportunity like this will come my way. That would be a good example of, how I embrace servant leadership.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you mentioned mental health and ambitious. Ambitious could have a positive and a negative impact, right?
Yep.
Now looking forward that you have your daughters, how would you describe ambitious to them? And in what way would you let them know to be ambitious?
Yes. So I would say ambition is obviously the drive that you want to pursue something. There's a purpose that is ahead of you, and your drive, your ambition is what is going to help you get there. At the same time, you have to be realistic about what is your purpose versus what are the things that you like to do, right? Separating that is really important because, you mentioned I'm the EVP of operations for Alpha Phoenix. That's a nonprofit board. And so it's all volunteer work. I have about 10 directors that are reporting into me. And at the same time, I run a business. I have my daughters. I have my husband, if you count him as a third child, maybe. No, he's amazing, by the way. But, it is a lot. It can be a lot to balance all that. But everything that I say yes to, every opportunity that I take on, I come into it with like, here's my expectations. And here's what you can expect out of me with this opportunity. So I'm transparent. I have a family. These are my working hours. There's that understanding of I need the balance in between all of this. And if I come into a situation that say, well, we can't do that, then it's not going to work out for me. As much as that might seem like an amazing opportunity, it might not work for yourself. And I want my girls to know that too. You can be ambitious. You can go after your purpose, but everything you do has to align with that purpose. And everything you do has to be realistic based on your capacity, your own mental, physical capacity.
And it's okay to say no or not be able to do it sometimes.
Absolutely.
What do you do to stay mental healthy?
So I will say I'm not 100% there yet. There's like my physical health, for one. I really want to work on that more. But in terms of mental health, emotional intelligence, that was a huge skill for me to adapt to throughout my career, throughout my personal life. And it starts with like even like in your personal life, understanding who you need around you, right? There was a lot of people that I had in my life, but were they all good for me? Were they all people that were actually supportive of me, or were they really not wishing the best for me behind my back? And sometimes, even if you have someone in your life for 10 years, 15 years, if they're not good for you, then it's time to go your separate ways, right? So it really started with the people that I had in my life. Once I had the right people in my circle and supporting me, it was like a breath of fresh air. I was able to think clearly, act clearly on things. And then in a professional sense, I had to learn, because I was a bit stubborn early on in my career, like probably most of us. I didn't like to hear every kind of feedback that I got, but I always embraced feedback. That's one thing about me. I've always asked for feedback and taken it, whether I liked it or not. How I reacted to that feedback was the growth part for me when it came to my emotional intelligence. And so having that skill as like a core part of how I operate, it's helped me get through the mental health aspect and not, and there are times where I will cry too. Like, we all need our sessions, our crying sessions, right?
Crying is
like
good.
crying, you just not let it out. But, it's also the times, right? Like, I choose to do that in my own private space or with my husband if I'm venting to him, like.
And that's the importance, again, of having a good support system.
Yes, exactly. You're venting to the right people, not the people that are like, oh, she's crying, she's in a bad
And
space
it's hard
right now.
because not necessarily that, but crying might make you look weak, and sometimes we don't want to look weak. We just want to, we want to prove that we're strong, but we need that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
With having a good support system, like, what do you look for?
So I look for people that align with my same values. So, like, one of my core values is transparency, whether it's personal or professional. I want a certain level of transparency between me and another person, because that helps me understand, like, is this the right situation? Is this the place I need to be? Are you the right person for me to be connecting with? And, I think that even goes into, like, if you think about job searches, right? Like, I was laid off actually from my full-time job in August of last year. And I didn't immediately go into this mode where, like, I'm going to apply everywhere. I'm going to, I targeted the companies. I looked for people who I had referrals with at companies. And when I met those hiring managers or recruiters, if I felt like something wasn't right or they weren't aligned with my core values, I said, this is just not going to work for me. I've even dropped out of processes. And that can be scary, especially if you think about the job market we're in right now. There's thousands of layoffs happening. There's people out there that would be desperate just to get one job, like, offer, right? So I think it's so important. It kind of goes back to, like, what is your purpose? What are your values? And I lean in with that. And that's how I've been able to establish a strong brand and mindset, clear mindset on what I will and will not accept.
Tell us about, is it Take or Takey?
It's Take. So it is named after my daughters, Tiana and Chloe. The E is kind of meant to be, like, exclusive, because our target audience is women and underrepresented leaders. Those are the ones that need the most support when they're building their brand, personally and professionally. So
how did you come up with that name? What inspired you to put your daughter's name in there?
Yes. So I wanted to make sure that, okay, I'm ready to start a business now. This has to be a legacy that my daughters can also be a part of at some point. And so that was already in my head. And I'm like, well, of course, like, let me try to incorporate their name.
Right.
And it was so easy, right? It was like Tiana and Chloe, T-A-K. I'm like, well, and here's my exclusive kind of audience. So there you go. Like, that's why it's capitalized with the lowercase e. It's intentionally that way. And it helps because there's puns that I can do with that too, in marketing and all of that. But, I wanted to make sure that this was a company that they could potentially take over if they wanted to, later on.
What do they think about that? Like, their name being in your your company.
So they're excited. They were excited when I told them about it. They don't pay much attention to it now because they're 5 and 11, so they're not really worried about, like, what I'm doing. They're more of less like, do I have food on the table? Do I have clothes? Like, Mom, can we go somewhere fun? So, they don't think about it as much now, but when I first told them, they were really excited.
Yeah. But I think it's awesome. Like looking at your 11-year-old now and looking at yourself when you were 11, like what differences do you see there?
Yes. So it's funny because it's hard not to bring that trauma that I had as a child into like the experiences she has. So what I practice is, when we bought our house, we looked at where is the neighborhood. We live in North Phoenix, so it's not quite Cave Creek, but the school she goes to is much more diverse than the school I went to. So I try to set her up for success in that way where she's not just put into, these environments where she can be attacked. And of course, she still has things she goes through as a child, and we talk about it. But everything, like things that I went through as a child, I'm very mindful of those things now, so that way I can put her in a better situation.
With now being a mom of 2 little girls, how do you feel like that has helped you become a better person?
Oh gosh. So I think, okay, so here's the thing. When I actually first had my 11-year-old, the reason behind wanting a kid was because I wanted someone who would love me unconditionally. I didn't have the best relationships in my life, whether it was family, boyfriends, whatever it was. But I was like, you know what? If I have a kid, my kid's going to love me. I'm going to love them. We're just going to be besties, right? Let's not quote like my broke little bestie. That's how I feel, and so it was really more about that. It was like, oh, this person's going to love me. But it also has taught me patience. That's one area or skill or whatever you want to call it.
Being a mom,
Veronica knows she has 2 kids as well.
I'm still trying to work on that particular skill, but it's taught me patience. It's taught me understanding too for maybe even things that she goes through that I didn't go through, right? Or that I didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
And honestly, like they motivate me, both of them. They're so different too. Like their personalities are just complete night and day. It's so funny to see. But, I wanted to make sure that I also did what my mom did, which was be a good role model to my daughters. She, when my mom brought me to Arizona, she didn't bring me here to be like, oh, I want her to get bullied and I want her to have all these issues.
She was just trying to look
She
the
was
best
looking
for you.
out for me, and it just, again, inadvertently, there were some side effects to that. And so being a parent, I'm more aware of those things.
That's awesome. I was talking about 11 because that seems to be like our lucky number, right? I was 11 when I came here to the United States, starting a new school. You came to a different state.
Yep.
Right? Me coming into a different country, not knowing the language.
Yep.
Was a little hard for me. But last week, I went to the elementary school back. My son is playing basketball.
Okay.
So he had a game at the same elementary school that I went to, and it brought back like all those memories. I walk in there and I was like, oh, so nostalgic, just thinking about like the 11-year-old girl that I was there. That's why when I mentioned that to you, like, the comparison with your daughter and yourself, like you see it different now. Like you think, oh, that young girl that I was once can help this 11-year-old girl now, like be stronger and be ambitious for what she wants in her career. So.
And thank you for sharing that too, because I had a conversation with Fatima around the generational aspect. I told you I'm a 3rd-gen Latina because my grandparents are from another country, but they came to the United States. My parents came to the United States, and that's a different experience than someone who is like a 1st-gen where their grandparents, their parents, and them all come from another country to, a state in the United States. And so we tend to have people like put us all in one bucket, like, oh, you're Latino, you're Latina, so you're kind of all the same, right? You just have different, you're Dominican, you're Puerto Rican, right? You're a little different in that way. But in fact, our upbringing is so different. Like the opportunities I had were not the same opportunities that I'm sure you may have had coming in from out of the country. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough as a community. And I think we should. I think we should share those stories because, you know, that's partly why I'm not fluent in Spanish. I know very little Spanish. And that's part of why, like, you know, at some point in my life, I didn't feel like I was Latina enough. I was like, oh, I don't speak Spanish. I don't have the accent. I grew up in a rich neighborhood, and it just made me feel less of who I really am. So
yeah, and it's important, right, to embrace our culture, you know, where we come from, where we're going, specifically because of the way it might make us feel sometimes. You know, for me, it might be different. Like, when I go back to Mexico, it's like I don't feel the same as the people that are there, or I'm here, I don't feel like the ones that are here. But just embracing is what makes us, you know, kind of like surpass that and become successful in whatever we want to come. Because at the end, it's like our culture, and we have to continue embracing it.
I agree. And I'll say, like, one other thing, you know, when I started studying at GCU, that's when I started to become more confident as a leader. And I started to, like, you know, act and do things that a leader would do that I really wasn't doing before. And that could be, again, like the emotional intelligence, the really honing in on that piece. And also just the patience for what growth looks like in the workplace and not rushing to get to the next promotion. But I found Alpha and Latinas in Tech, other organizations like that, a couple of years ago. And that is truly where I found community. Okay. That is what put me back in high spirits and reminded me, no, you are a Latina. Doesn't matter that you don't speak Spanish. Doesn't matter that you didn't come from Puerto Rico directly, right? No matter what, that is rooted in who you are. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm going to embrace this. I'm going to make sure that everyone knows how proud I am to be a Latina.
Yes.
And it was so inspirational to be in these spaces where I saw more people that looked like me, because I hadn't had that for so long, right? Over a decade, you know, 2 decades really before I really was around community like this, like when I was younger. And so it's really been amazing to be a part of the Alpha community and to really support other Latinas and Latinos.
Being EVP of operations for Alpha, like, besides what you shared about, you know, sharing with an Alpha teaching that it's okay, everyone's Latino enough. What other advice do you guys give that you could share with our audience to that are Latino professionals between, like, entry level to, like, mid level?
Yep. Well, so we definitely focus on the comunidad of it all, right? We want to make sure that's infused in our events, in the relationships that we're building with the corporate sponsors that we have. You know, shout out to Wells Fargo, Nationwide. There's a few that are key partners of ours that are very invested. They spend time working with us on, like, what type of events to attend and making sure that there's the right audience. So that way the people that are attending, they're bringing value to them, right? So we have student-focused events, we have professional-focused events, and then we have events that bring everybody together. And that's because I have this motto that I share with all of the leaders I work with, which is to plan with intention and execute with purpose. When we think about the events that we do, we're not just like, oh, let's talk about AI just because it's what's trending. No, let's talk about how AI is impacting, you know, your actual workday as a Latino or Latino. Latinas in Tech does that really well too, right? Because they're in the tech space. But we like to be very intentional with how we plan different events and ways to bring that community together. And then every single one of those experiences, there's a clear purpose behind it. And our partners help us make that happen We even have community partners that we work with. So these are other nonprofit organizations. CPLC actually just happens to be one
You
of
guys know how to
them.
party. We were there
Yes,
too.
exactly.
We
You
were
guys
there
were
for
at
the
our
Alpha
gala
Gala.
Oh
and
yeah, it was a great gala. I had a lot of fun.
you know, wherever our missions align. Another one is Young and Empowered. They're amazing. They help women in the Arizona. And so that's what we look for. We look for people to engage with partners that have that value to offer our community and of course, offering that value in return for our members.
So what words of wisdom you have for someone to go and join a board like this?
Yep. So I'm going to bring it back to the purpose for sure, right? Like that's one thing I ask every single potential board member in an interview is, what is your purpose in life, in volunteering? Like, why do you choose to do this? And then I ask them about, okay, so Alpha, like, what do you know about Alpha? What resonates with you about joining the Alpha board? Because I want to make sure, again, there's that servant leadership first and foremost. And then there's I have a passion for this community. I have a passion to empower other Latinos and Latinas, right? And so I look for that when I speak to people that join boards. So just make sure that this is something that really does align with your purpose, your own values, because volunteering, it can feel like a full-time job sometimes. So
Yes.
if you are not fully in it and you're just in it for like, oh, I want a title or I want kind of this on my resume, I just want to add it to my resume, it's not going to be the right fit for you, because we work hard and we do that because we want our members and partners to have an amazing experience. So be true to your purpose when you're thinking about joining, and be, again, as I mentioned before, be honest about like, what is your availability? What are the expectations that you have kind of going into this experience, and communicate everything. If you can't attend an event, tell us. Don't wait till the last minute. Just be open and honest and transparent about that.
And then also, like, speaking of purpose, like what advice do you give? Because you help people build their brand and find their voice. Like, what advice do you have that you usually give to your clients?
Yep. One piece of advice that I always seems to kind of circulate in conversations is sometimes we look for like the gaps in us. Like, what do I need to work on? What are the things that are stopping me from doing what I need to do? But if you kind of just take a step back, you might actually have to rebuild your foundation instead of trying to fill in gaps, right? Sometimes it's really reflecting on, am I actually living my purpose? And do the things that I do now, whether it's for work, volunteering, align with that purpose? So that's definitely something that comes up pretty often. Another thing is, a lot of, and we're sure you've heard this before, like, it's almost like we don't want to talk about ourselves. We get a little nervous. We don't want to say like, oh, I've done this and I've done that. And like, because we don't want to seem like we're just like all about us. Right.
Yeah.
But when you're building your brand, you have to really understand what is unique about you. And you have to be honest with yourself about that. And so, this will come in different ways, like negotiations. If you're trying to negotiate a role or a salary or whatever, there's actually a quote that really has been instilled in me, and it motivated me so much. It's, you will be too much for some people. Those are not your people.
Oh, okay.
So it's okay to walk away, and that doesn't have to be monetary.
You should say that to our audience. Speak to the camera.
Yes. So in certain occasions, you will be too much for some people. Those are not your people. And that is so important because, again, outside of the monetary aspect, sure, negotiations, if you don't get what you want or you're way far off, you might say no. But I'm just talking about even your personality. We get a reputation of being very loud as Latinas, right? That's okay. I'm loud. I might be too much for you. That's all right. And then we may not click. And so this is a relationship that probably won't develop any further from
And knowing
here.
your value too is important, right?
Yes.
I know sometimes it's like might seem as like bragging, but you can brag about yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's okay.
Yep.
Especially if it took you time, if it took you discipline to get where you're at right now.
Yep.
it's okay to brag.
Yep.
You know, could we inspire others?
Yep. There's one other thing I will say, and I'll say this directly to the to the audience. So stop trying to prove something, demonstrate it. That's the best you can do. Because if you say, oh, I want to prove I can do this for this promotion, or I want to prove that I'm ready for this, you don't have anything to prove to anybody. You just have to demonstrate it. If you are demonstrating that in your actions and your words, then people will see that in you, honestly. Yeah. I'll give you a quick example. I mentor different women as a part of different programs. One of my mentees came to me and she said, so I had a conversation with my boss and I asked him if, he thought I was ready for this promotion. And I said, okay, let's talk about that, because you have to know that you're ready.
You're ready, exactly.
That no one else can tell you that you're ready. You have to know that. And in that, you have to then say, here's what I've done, and here's how this promotion is going to help me thrive even more on top of that. What are your thoughts? Are there any opportunities that we can discuss? Or if it's about a specific opportunity, it could be like, this role right here is something that I want to grow into and I'm ready for. And if they have hesitations, they're going to tell you in their feedback. They might say, oh, well, you have this and that to work on, or you have these skills that you need to build. And those are very hard conversations to have with people. And that's where I told you before, like, feedback, I didn't always like it, but I accepted it and I embraced it, and that you have to, because, especially like with people like me, I'm direct in my feedback. That's something I'm working on too. I have to be able to adapt. Not everybody likes someone being so direct with them. And so I know I gave you like a quick story of my mentee, but it made me think of something else.
So I guess the question is, how do you deal with, as a servant leader, how do you deal with different personalities?
Yep. So this is perfect. It's a good segue. So let's use my EVP of operations, Alpha Phoenix, as an example. I transitioned. I already worked on the board last year, but I was a director. So some of these people that are now reporting into me were peers of mine. So there was that transition. And then we had new board members that were joining. And so I'm like, okay, we need to establish some norms here. How does everyone like to work? What is your availability? How do you like to receive feedback? How do you like to be held accountable for things? And so what I did was I created this form, very brief, asking them to kind of share this information. And so now everyone on the team can go back to that board. It's a board in Monday.com. If you've ever used it, it's a workforce management tool. But we can all go in there and we can see. So if I want to reach out to Fatima because I'm working with her on a project, I know that she's available Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays from this time. That's the time I'm going to reach out to her. And she likes direct and specific feedback. Whereas, maybe my colleague in another area wants not as they don't like direct feedback, but maybe they like data driven insights into the conversations. So we all get to know each other and respect each other's way of, processing information, processing feedback. And the availability piece is so huge as a volunteer, because this is literally like you're getting the very last of my time. There's family, there's work, there's probably other things. For me as a mom, it's driving my kids to gymnastics, soccer, all these other things, right?
Yeah, all the responsibilities.
And so like this is the time you have from a volunteer perspective. And so we've just started this, but I'm really excited to see how the team, navigates those different relationships and working with each other.
Yeah, so I guess we're out of time, but before we leave, would you be able to share with our audience a piece of advice that you would like to leave them with, or a quote, anything of sort?
Oh man, I've given you a lot of my good quotes.
All your golden nuggets.
All of my little nuggets I've given. I would say really honestly, like, going back to the purpose part, you've heard me mention it a lot. Finding your purpose is so important. Like, it is so important in everything that you do. And sometimes it takes reflection and uncomfortable thoughts and conversations with yourself to get there. But it's vital for you to be able to grow and be very clear about your goals and your milestones and how you're going to reach those things. And be confident in that. Be confident in yourself. Demonstrate, right? I've talked about demonstrating your value. I will be speaking sometimes in front of hundreds or thousands of people, and I will say, yeah, one of my goals is becoming a C-suite leader in a Fortune company. I'm going to do it. I will do it. And maybe some of the people in there are like, oh, you're crazy. Like, you're not gonna be able to do that. But I know I can. Or maybe some people are
like, if she thinks she can, then I can too.
Exactly. Yeah. Or
it's a possibility.
Pulling from that inspiration of, you know what? You're right. I can do that too.
Mm-hmm. In one of your previous interviews with Fatima, you mentioned the imposter syndrome. And then right now you talked about how you tell your mentee that nobody can tell you when you're ready, but maybe she was going through that. How can you get out of that syndrome? Yep. Or have you ever been there and thought yourself like, I'm not ready, or somebody told you that you weren't ready?
Yep, absolutely. So I tell people embrace imposter syndrome. I know a lot of people will talk about like, oh, here's how you can overcome it. But I'm not a fan of overcoming it. It's natural for us to, as human beings, it is completely natural to have these thoughts of, can I do this? If I do this, will this be impacted? Or am I good enough? It's okay. Those thoughts are normal. And that's what you have to remind yourself of. That, you know what? Let me just stop here. This is normal, Amanda. Of course, you know you can do this. Don't even worry about it. Sometimes it's acknowledging it and then giving yourself that pep talk that you need. Sometimes for me, it's if I'm speaking in front of audiences, I'll think about like my coming out song, which is the Sia. Oh wow! Now I can't even.
Chandelier?
No, it's Unstoppable.
Unstoppable. Yes,
like, yes. It's like escaped my mind. But maybe it's that for you. Maybe like pick a song that you really resonate to. So that way, when you're in the moments where you're like, can I do this? Yes, you can. Mm-hmm. Hold on to something that helps you remind you of that. And be okay with those thoughts that come in your head. Just don't dwell in them. Same with the emotional intelligence aspect. We talked about we can cry it out, right? We can have our episodes, but don't get stuck in that for too long. Come out of it and move forward. But process it just like you are as the human being you are.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
Amanda. It's been a pleasure. I know as a Latina, especially Puerto Ricans and, everyone in the Caribbean has heard this phrase, ¿Qué le da sazón a tu vida?
Yes.
Oh, so we can't forget that question.
That was one of our questions, like, right? What gives spice to your life?
Yep. My husband, actually, I would say, because when I met him, in general, he's really introverted, actually. So when I met him, he saw me and he's like, oh my gosh, she's so spontaneous and adventurous. She just loves it and she's ambitious. And he's kind of the opposite. He was more of the like imposter syndrome, like really honing in on those kind of things. And because of that, we've really complemented each other. Words, love them. And so because of that, it's really spiced up our life, our relationship. And when you have a healthy relationship, oh gosh, it does wonders to like the rest of the relationships that you have in your life. When you have someone that can be supportive and that can really pull the best out of you.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yes.
Well, Fatima, it's been great being here with you today, co-hosting this. Thank you so much, Amanda,
Absolutely.
for sharing your story.
Absolutely.
It was great having you here.
Thank you so much to the both of you. It's been awesome.
Awesome. And then I guess that's the wrap for this episode. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Veronica. And we hope to see you guys at our next episode.